this week's episode of Homescreen, where I'm going to be talking to Joe Robinson, who is one of the CEOs from a really cool product over in the United States called Hummingbird. Hummingbird handle one particular part of the AML stack. So this is, Joe will talk a little bit about this in the future, about seeing 3 parts of a stack. And today Joe's going to be talking to us about their particular solution. This is a super prescient interview, especially considering what's been happening over with the FinCEN file leaks, how big banks are handling anti-money laundering and filing reports around suspicious activity. And today Joe's going to be talking to us about 3 separate bits of functionality. The first is the investigation tools. So he's going to explain to us exactly how Hummingbird helps people to really, really minimize the amount of time they spend investigating different fraudulent anti-money laundering cases and make more accurate decisions. Then the second part will cover kind of 2 distinct parts. One is a section called Triage, where there'll be an initial kind of set of decisions made about a person's, about a particular set of transactions. And then after that is escalated, then they file the suspicious activity reports that have become so famous off the back of this recent round of news articles from BuzzFeed. So we'll take a look at exactly how Hummingbird does that, and then also an introduction for a few other countries, despite apart from the US, who haven't maybe come across Hummingbird before. So great way for you guys to see, because they'll be coming over to the UK and to Ireland and a few other countries. So it'll be a nice way for you to see what functionality they can offer and how you can work with them as well. Enjoy the episode. Would you mind kind of just starting off to tell us kind of what Hummingbird is, just for those that don't know, maybe those in the UK, for example, where Hummingbird's not currently operating or not quite yet operating. What's the core problem that the product's trying to solve, and so
on? Thanks so much for having me. I am the founder and CEO of Hummingbird. We're a platform for investigating financial crime and helping financial institutions with their compliance obligations. The company was founded by people that were working in the payment space and experienced some of the problems. We basically have been building the tool set that we always wanted for managing the compliance operations. Our focus is on, helping investigators look at suspicious or unusual behavior, ensuring that they're protecting the user and consumer rights, and then investigating that crime and reporting it to law enforcement authorities when needed.
And that's obviously incredibly prescient right now in the wake of those FinCEN file leaks and so on. So you must have maybe not cheered or shouted for joy, when that happened, but you must have been pretty delighted that this has come out and there's an opportunity for a company like Hummingbird to come in and to try and shake things up a little bit. Is that the way that you were thinking about that? And I guess as a corollary to that question, is there anyone else thinking about that in the current space in the US? And who are the competition in that regard?
Yeah, so the FinCEN files, I think, reveal a lot of sad things about the fight against financial crime. It's not as effective as we'd like it to be today. It's inefficient. It can be really tedious work for the people that are responsible for that at the financial institutions. I think the leak of files and the ensuing reports on it do shine a spotlight on the need for more effective measures and more innovation on the technology side and on the regulatory side. But there was a lot of incorrect information in the reports as well. They were very sensationalized. Unfortunately, I think they sort of overlook the work of the actual practitioners in the space. There are literally hundreds of thousands of people globally whose job it is to find unusual behavior, suspicious behavior, fight organized crime. It's not an easy job to do. It's sometimes very, very difficult to detect the rules and the requirements of different jurisdictions that these organizations work in make a lot of additional complexity, make the job much harder, basically to do effectively. So we've seen in the wake of the original BuzzFeed articles quite a bit of very positive conversation in the community about ways to reform anti-money laundering practices, to search for effectiveness. Even before the leak, we were seeing a lot of push to foster innovation, both from federal regulators, from law enforcement agencies, and obviously from the financial industry themselves, which for them, it's a huge operating expense to conduct this work, but in many cases, it's their first and foremost concern when trying to deliver new services to market. So I think, net positive to have the visibility and the discussion around the practice area. I wish the original articles had maybe gone into more detail about the work and some of the reasons that things happen the way that they do, but that conversation is certainly coming out in some of the articles that have followed.
In the sense of the product itself, from what I understand, Hummingbird, Hummingbird will tackle one particular part of the AML stack. Your decks, for example, talk about sort of banks taking over things like onboarding or being responsible for the onboarding experience, and Hummingbird handling, as we've mentioned there, things like the reporting side of it, the kind of serious activity reporting, probably the most prescient for what's going on at the minute. There's also some talk of a kind of a move across the pond, or to come over to, I believe it's Ireland in the first instance, and then more widely. What do you envisage kind of a change in the way that your product is offered on this side of the pond as opposed to the US? In the UK, I think when we think about anti-money laundering, we think about companies that handle onboarding. So companies that offer sort of solutions within the onboarding flow, companies like Onfido and Jumio and so on. Where do you want to attack the stack of the UK kind of, the UK sort of fintech scene, and what does it mean to be getting into the UK market?
That's right. We're excited for that and making a lot of progress on that. We'll approach the problem in the same place that we do today. I tend to think about the anti-money laundering practice area as three large chunks. One is the initial customer diligence and onboarding, just verifying that the customers you're signing up are who they say they are and are not operating as a front for organized crime or something like that. Yeah. The second is they're on, they're live, they're using your service. So there's an activity monitoring, practice area that helps you detect anomalous behavior and strange things or changes in behavior that might be indicative of, illegal activity. And the third is the orchestration of how you actually investigate those alerts, as they're often called, from the reporting, how you actually communicate the information to law enforcement agencies that can actually do something about it.
Yeah.
Hummingbird has always been focused on helping you do the investigation work and the reporting work. We work with a lot of in-house solutions for customer onboarding and transaction monitoring. We are integrated with a number of great vendors for that. And so our focus is really on providing the best investigation reporting experience. And the same thing applies in the UK and in other markets around the world. We want to help with that communication channel. How do you process all the information? How do you investigate it? How do you annotate it with your findings so that it's clear to other people you're collaborating with? And then how do we open up the communication channel with law enforcement, who ultimately receive the information, take it, and we hope prosecute the criminals involved in the activity. So,
how did you identify this as the area of the stack that you, as a team, wanted to attack? Why did you decide that this was the problem that Hummingbird would solve?
It comes from our experience as operators in the space. I was a product manager at Square. I wasn't working on compliance or risk there. but I saw some of that. I was the product manager for the e-commerce marketplace, which marketplaces are great places to launder money. And I had the good fortune of having, some colleagues who kept us safe, some colleagues in the compliance area that kept us safe and made sure, we didn't do something crazy with it. When I left Square, I went to another company in the cryptocurrency space, and we were exchanging fiat currencies for Bitcoin in 2014 and on. And another market for, money laundering, right? I mean, if you can exchange currencies that way and you have this anonymity preserving cryptocurrency that you can move around the world, and that's that's a great vehicle for bad things, unfortunately. A lot of good things as well, don't get me wrong.
Sure.
But we found that our needs for customer onboarding and for transaction monitoring were fairly specific use cases to those companies. So the needs of a cryptocurrency, exchange are going to be very different than a traditional bank or a mortgage lender or other types of financial institution. And so, our philosophy has been modularity of tools. As I said, a lot of times we're working with in-house solutions. We find that more tech savvy institutions tend to bring some of these practice areas in-house. And we think the highest return on investment they can have doing that are going to be in the areas that are most specific to their business, which of course are customer onboarding and ongoing activity monitoring. So Hummingbird is sort of purpose built to be the things that are more generalized. They're more governed by the regulatory function. We try to do things that are complementary to in-house teams or to best-in-class vendors. And we try to, work on the things that really make sense to do, really only make sense to build if you're a compliance company like Hummingbird is, and that's our business model, of course. But for a normal financial institution to build case management, SAR or STR filing capabilities, other things like that in-house, they're not differentiators. They're low return on investment from an engineering perspective. And so we try to take those things off the plate of the customers that we work with.
Sure. How does that lens of you being a product manager, as you mentioned before, meeting your co-founder when you were doing a product manager role, I guess, how's that kind of layer into the project? How does that layer into the way that you run Hummingbird as an organization? And did it kind of help you to solve any particular problems that might have occurred at the initial stages or even ongoing?
Yeah, so most of my career is as a product manager, and we always take a very product lens to what we're thinking about, and what do I mean by that? We're always thinking about the user need and the user experience as one of the first and foremost concerns. We think that a lot of utility can be built that way. It's been interesting for us with Hummingbird. We have a really distinct mix of that product development expertise and design and engineering. And then we actually have, two former regulators that are on the founding team. Oh, wow. And so we have deep subject matter expertise in the compliance practice area as well. We don't see that at a lot of companies, even in our space. And I think one of the things we've done successfully as a team is respecting the diversity of views and the different needs that sort of come out of those backgrounds, and trying to bring it together into a product that's really purpose built for a very, very specialized practice area. In some ways on the product side, I was excited when we looked around the space as buyers at some of the prior companies I mentioned. In some ways I was like, wow, we could be the first company that does any design thinking in this practice area, right? It just was totally an oversight and sort of a neglected, practice area within the, legacy products in the space.
Yeah.
And so we saw this really great opportunity to kind of provide high utility and really celebrate the work of the compliance people rather than just focusing on, data and really raw interfaces and things like that. So
yeah, for sure. And I guess, as you said, like an opportunity to build interfaces that people will be able to use would be, anything is a win, but it must be particularly nice to be able to go in there with carte blanche and say, there are no pre-existing design patterns for this thing that we're doing. So all we can do is just go to the user experience and the user's kind of feedback and build off that. Must have been I can imagine that being a really, really nice sort of approach for this, and not one you get to do very often.
No, it was sort of this unloved space for design, and we're fortunate that like there has been a wave of great design coming to the enterprise space in other sectors, right? A lot of us experienced that at Square, where it's a B2B product for merchants, but almost treated as a consumer design and as a product that is intended to be as simple to use as possible. And
absolutely,
that philosophy of
And whenever people talk about Stripe as well, the idea of similar, a product built for engineers, essentially payment infrastructure for the internet, but it looks like it looks. And I think that, and similar thing for as you said, like the Square approach, two very similar companies in that regard. I think it's the gloves are really off, and anyone can and is expected to now design beautiful and nicely designed interfaces. So that it's always a delight for anyone who's looking at a lot of interfaces like I do for my job. So I guess without further ado, we should look at the first one of those interfaces.
Sure.
And we're going to take a look at the investigation flow. So this is the investigation. So when users will actually be using your tool to go through and provide information about the person and the case itself. There's Saruman here, and then there's a load of really nice quick links here. A really cool one here, which I guess is just put an and/or statement into Google and produced automatically any information that we might want to find out about the individual.
It's a giant query,
Giant query indeed. And then we can very quickly and easily, like all in one movement, attach those files to the report.
And investigators will do this, right? They'll be conducting dozens of searches, and then they want to capture that they've actually done that search. And so we've just made that as easy as possible with screenshotting. So
and then we look into the transactions tab here. We can see again the different size of transactions.
That's right.
Looking for spikes here, I guess, in behavior.
I mean, you can pretty quickly see there that 3 deposits are unusually large for this account, right? And so those would be the signal. This is a pattern called structuring in money laundering.
Right.
And now you can click over and see where it actually happened.
Yeah, this is a really neat function. Great to see, like on the geolocation stuff, exactly where that stuff's going on.
These 2 smaller locations here are just showing you that this user went out of their way to make the structured deposits at 2 bank branches that they don't normally go to, which is a really common pattern.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And the connections area there, just a quick note on what was going on there.
This is a normal connection graph. It's not indicative of identity theft. So the connections chart would be more indicative of a collusion or a ring of, card thieves or something like that. But nothing unusual in that one we looked at.
The investigation flow. I've got a feeling you're going to answer this by telling me about your compliance team or the compliance or regulatory experts in a bit more detail, but how does the information, how do you decide what information is needed here? what format it needs to be put in, and kind of how does that work from the product perspective? So what talk us through the process of how you got from here's what the regulatory experts we're so lucky to have on our team say, here's the product delivery on the other side.
When you're investigating a case in compliance, generally you're trying to look at the life cycle of activity you've had from that customer, that subject. And so usually it's, say one transaction will flag anomalous behavior. It'll be maybe a large cash deposit or any number of things can trigger something.
Yeah.
What you're trying to do in the investigation is look at the entire sort of life cycle of your relationship with that customer across data sources. And this is one of the big problems in compliance is if you are a large financial institution or even a medium and sometimes a small financial institution, you might have data about that customer in lots of different places and in lots of different formats. And so one of the things that we focus on is trying to make it very, very easy to get data into Hummingbird. We have a great set of, RESTful APIs, very easy to use, but a lot of times you're going to encounter data formats that are in spreadsheets or Word documents or image files or things like that. And so some of the things that we're seeing in the product here are focused on how do we quickly make sense of that data and move it into a standardized schema. The standardized schema, of course, allows us to better categorize things, automate downstream reports, alert you, if you've already investigated someone. Duplicate investigations are actually a huge time suck for a lot of people. You won't realize that you've already investigated a subject in the past, and so you just repeat that diligence over again. So the investigation is really, it's defined by policy, but it's generally in the neighborhood of 6 to 12 months of all of the customer's activity.
And are these these regulations which kind of which you guys will kind of work with in order to help to kind of to generate these investigations? Do they tend to be are they global kind of in scope, or do they tend to be specific to the United States? And how does that work from your kind of, if you've got individuals with money in different countries, for example, how does that work from that perspective?
This is a really interesting part of how the whole system works, actually. In most countries, you have regulations as guidance about what you're supposed to do as a financial institution. But the financial institution is actually responsible for assessing the risk of its product, its customers, and the geographies that it serves, and creating appropriate controls for that business model. And the reason that's interesting, I think, is, I think a lot of times it's imagined to be, the government is telling you, very, very specifically what you have to do. And, in some areas of regulation, of course, that's true. But in other areas, the guidance is to use what's called a risk-based approach, which is, you conduct an internal assessment to determine what you should be doing in these practices and procedures. And you're basically trying to demonstrate to a regulator that you've made a thorough assessment of the risks that you face, and that you're putting appropriate controls and procedures in place to address those risks. So it varies a little bit by institution. Many people don't know, but for example, a casino is a licensed financial institution. Right. And so you can imagine the controls and procedures and things like that a casino has are, of course, going to be very, very different from a different type of institution, a credit card network or a payments provider or something like that.
Sure. So in the UK in particular, we've, and I'm sure there are other examples around the world which will support that. A lot of the innovation that comes about from a technological and specifically in the fintech space has come via the regulatory space. So, for example, the initiatives of the open banking facility here in the UK, and also the kind of the competition that was introduced after 2008 and after those sorts of things encouraged a new generation of technological disruptors to come in and to play their part in changing the landscape. Do you think that there is a situation here with this type of reporting, this type of this investigation, that is diffusing disruption rather than generating, a better way of doing things? How would you think about that particular question?
Well, we have the benefit of a few organizations that are, multi-member in terms of the countries that are participating, and they are trying to drive innovation in this space. Okay. The Financial Action Task Force is a large one that, countries are members of, and they tried to sort of harmonize the rules about financial crime and ensuring that countries are safe to, interact with and bank with and make transfers with and things like that.
Yeah.
There are also some more specific initiatives. There is an initiative underway in the UK to look at anti-money laundering reporting and SARS. Your Financial Conduct Authority has been, very aggressively pushing for innovation in a lot of areas of regulation.
Yeah.
We've been very impressed by some of the projects and programs and tech sprints and things like that they've put together.
Yeah.
And there are some interesting, one of the anti-money laundering standard reporting formats is actually a service provided by the UN called 𝗂𝗃_AML. It's part of a broader project for helping the government side of receiving and processing this information have better tooling, and essentially offers like a software development kit for what's called the Financial Intelligence Unit, the government regulatory agencies that are responsible for receiving this information. And we know that the folks on the UN team are doing a lot of really interesting work to try and push for innovation in that space as well. So there's a lot going on. I mean, it's a huge societal issue. I mean, everybody quotes these stats about $2 trillion laundered every year and less than 1% caught, and industry is spending upwards of $250 billion a year trying to fight financial crime. So it's complicated, and we're just encouraged by the amount of innovation that we're seeing, different stakeholders in that economy, push for. So
a little bit more back onto the product that we've just seen there. There's a few beta areas that you're kind of working on with in that workflow. What's the aim behind kind of some of those more sort of some of those more development sort of there's currently developed areas that you're working on, and how do you plan to help to make those contribute to the work that you're currently doing?
Yeah. Well, an area that we love as technologists and designers is, what kind of analytics and data visualization capabilities can we offer to help somebody quickly make sense of things. So we have the three shown in our demo here. We focus on the geolocations that are part of a case. Those can often be, great indicators of, money laundering tactics, basically. Obviously showing the transactions, we've thought a lot about what is a transaction, how do you model a transaction? How do you model, transactions from different types of organizations and different payment protocols and different services in, a consistent data visualization that makes sense and is still useful. So trying to process that fragmentation into something that's more standardized and provides general utility is one of the challenges that we think a lot about.
Yeah, sure.
And then just, I think with financial crime, it's almost rare to see someone operating individually. So the more sophisticated organizations and the organizations that are moving lots and lots of money are networks of people. And so understanding the connections between different entities, that data visualization is really important, because a normal human being can't just look at spreadsheet data or tabular data and see that. They can't see those connections. You have to have some visualization to spot that stuff. So
yeah, for sure. I guess especially when you're dealing with huge numbers of reports as well, being able to really quickly point out anomalies will make these people's lives a lot easier to handle the work.
I mean, you think about finance at scale, right? And of course, like, we would love to imagine that every single unusual behavior gets a really thorough investigation by an expert team, and there's 20 people sitting around a conference room and discussing the merits and the investigation tactics. But it's finance at scale, right? There are trillions of transactions. Look at the explosion of different financial services that people use and how we interact with our financial lives. We have to be able to move through these things very efficiently. And so a big part of our design thinking is how to get the right information in front of the investigator quickly, so that they're making a sound judgment, but also, an efficient judgment on the cases, and can kind of get through the actual work that they need to do.
Sure. We'll look at the second video now.
Sure. So
this is the first part of two clips that will show related to this functionality. So there's the My Cases area here. And we also have these workflows that we've seen, again, nicely color-coded to include the different colors. We can see two workflows currently in activity at the minute. We can reassign kind of reorder the table based on where we want information to sit relative to other bits. And we can, I'm missing anything there. Okay, we've got this import cases function. So the ability to dump data in.
This is a really important feature for us. Yeah.
Where would you want to get these kind of data sets from? Where would you get the information?
They come from everywhere. I mean, the thing is one of the big problems in the space is a lot of times the compliance practice area is the last to receive engineering support. So you don't see a lot of software engineers working on this problem. And so this ability to import data from spreadsheets and basically restructure, flat files, was something that, we quickly learned was going to be an important part of the product for us, even though it's mostly not in the front end.
Yeah, for sure. And then we have the ability to dive into these triage examples. And then
we just imported all of this information from a flat file and aggregated it, created the separate data entities. And what this allows us to do, the way we've unpacked the person, the accounts, the transactions here from that spreadsheet, means that Hummingbird behind the scenes is able to automate, a lot of the reporting that's happening downstream. So in larger studies, over 90% of an investigator's time in the industry is actually spent just moving data around between different data sources. And so even though it's not a visual feature, what we just saw there is Hummingbird probably just eliminated, an hour or more from this case.
And then this insights area includes locations, transactions, and connections. And we can escalate different areas and complete a series of activities. Tagging fraud, talking about different products and instruments. I guess that's the different type of financial products being used.
Yep. So we're filling in we're capturing the investigator's insight, but also adding this to the reports. The issue today is the human insight on top of the case is mostly put into PDF documents, report documents, things like that, where, if you're a data scientist or analyst, that's looking at these things after the fact.
Yeah.
How do you get data out of a PDF? I mean, it can be done, but it's it's a proprietary format and very difficult to do. And so I think one of the things that we've tried to do with Hummingbird is, you're capturing these structured insights, you're getting the analyst to categorize what happened, you're closing the feedback loop on the case. And we deliver all of that back to you as, CSV data or as JSON through our APIs. So a data science team can just pull it in. They have structured data. They don't have to spend any time on trying to organize those findings. They can just start right away writing models against it and things like that.
And anyone who's ever tried to clean data in any meaningful way will thank you for that, I'm sure.
I mean, I started the data science team at my last job, and honestly, it could have been called the data cleaning team, because it's like you just spend all your time doing that.
Yeah, it must be a big kind of part of the Hummingbird experience is to actually take, to a certain extent, it must be part of it, a data cleaning sort of service, in the sense of you're taking disparate sources of information and then putting them in the format which works for that investigation or that review, and then giving it to the people who need it in the best possible format. So I'm sure in your previous role that would have been a fine training for this particular product. So in terms of the kind of the format there, the investigation, we're talking here about an AML investigation, so it's an anti-money laundering investigation.
Right.
Will you say presumably this data will come in and then it will go back to the, as you were mentioning before, the institution which actually is doing the investigation, so the bank themselves, if in some cases, or as you mentioned before, like the casino or something. And so would they essentially be, in this instance, they would be giving you some information to then, for you to then restructure it and present it in the right way to then do their own investigations, or will that go up to the regulator instead? How does it work from that perspective?
Well, you can think about it as they are doing the investigation. They're adding their own insights as people working for the bank are completing these reviews and categorizing things. They're the experts, right? They've been trained in this stuff. They've done a lot of cases before. What's interesting about the anti-money laundering flow is you have, alert, investigation, report to authorities, and then on the flip side, which doesn't get talked about a whole lot, the authorities actually take the information, build cases with it, and it moves into prosecution and evidence in trials. But generally, from a data science perspective, if you're thinking about how would I train a model to know what was useful downstream, there's generally, there are, in very rare occasions, you get some feedback that, a SAR filing was used as prosecution evidence or something like that, but it's incredibly rare. Right. Most organizations don't get that at all. Cool. And so as data scientists at Hummingbird looking at the problem, we basically have just moved the feedback loop up and said, you get this alert, you get the set of data associated with the alert, the user's behavior for the last year, for example. And then you have a human expert going through and labeling that data and categorizing the activity. Why not just end the feedback loop there and say, based on what you saw in, the last 1,000 cases that looked like this, what activity did you think occurred, and what what might you want to investigate here? How can we kind of facilitate and augment that investigation? So,
sure. Perfect. And then we'll look at the second part of the flow, which is, we've completed those sort of proprietary checks, and we've raised the triage from triage up to an AML investigation. Now, in that AML investigation, we can do a certain number of things here. So there's an action here from the US filing perspective. So What is a US filing from your perspective? How do these things get ticked off, and who by?
These are suspicious activity reports. This is our workflow for creating a 𝗲.
Yeah.
And for viewers, the 𝗲 has something like 300 fields, and there are different validations that are kind of permutations of those fields. So what we've done is we've reduced that quite a bit. We've automated away a lot of that. We have a very extensive validation library on the back end. Mm-hmm. But yeah, you're basically going through the regulatory reporting obligation. Again, per case, let's say I look at the case or look at the data, I know what happened. Now, pre-Hummingbird, you're like, okay, now I have a couple of hours to actually put this information and synthesize my thoughts into a PDF document.
Yeah.
And so, now it takes maybe a minute or two to kind of go through and indicate the things that you want. We've got narrative templates and
a huge time saving, isn't it?
It is, yeah. And it results in higher quality reports. The reports are more thorough. They include the information that law enforcement wants to see. We take into account law enforcement's feedback on these things as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's just a huge amount of time savings here.
And there we can see
there's the validation. Yeah.
Okay. And how does that work, that validation?
We are running behind the scenes checks on all of the data in the case, which can be quite a bit. I mean, you could have hundreds of accounts, hundreds of subjects, thousands of transactions in a case. So we're just automating what the regulatory agencies have provided as guidance on validating those cases.
So we've defined therefore that triage is maybe the step before you would go towards this AML investigation or this SARS reporting flow that we've just seen. Mm-hmm. How do you think about the difference between those two, and why would you want to define cases based on those two opportunities?
Yeah, in terms of sort of the raw alerts that are coming out of reporting, you want to have your settings dialed such that you're actually getting a lot of false alerts, false alarms.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is just that you want to make sure you're not missing something, right? So you want to be a little bit overprotective, if you will. That doesn't mean you report on everything, right? So the triage stage is designed to allow institutions to take a look at the alert and then make a determination if it was actually suspicious behavior or if it's more easily explained as normal behavior for a particular customer.
Cool.
So I don't know the exact stats, it varies by institution, but I don't think anyone listening would say that it's crazy to say that only one in 10 alerts or less actually moves through to a full investigation and filing.
Great. So a final few questions just before we wrap up. Obviously, you guys still pretty recent. You've not been around for a very long time, but and you've already achieved quite a substantial amount. But obviously, what's the next step for the company and for the products that you're offering? How do you kind of think about those things?
Yeah, we like to say that we're about three years in market and about 70 years total on our team thinking about the problem. What's next for us? We are growing. We're growing our customer base. We're growing the number of use cases. We've extended from anti-money laundering into some other important compliance practice areas like dispute management. These are transaction disputes. They're mostly consumer protections, keeping the consumers protected from nefarious financial institutions. We're hiring, we're growing our team. We're set to double the team size probably over the next few months. Nice. It's a really exciting time for Hummingbird.
And in terms of I don't know, I wouldn't know if you raised capital or anything like that, but I would imagine there have been a few people knocking on your door recently asking to give you certain chunks of money to solve this problem. Have you have you seen in the recent kind of days and weeks a kind of an upsurge in people's appetite to tackle this problem specifically?
Yeah, I think the FinCEN files have pushed for renewed call for innovation. We're seeing some groups do that. On the capital side, there's been a great community of investors that are supporting regulatory innovation for a while now, actually. So I think more people are getting interested in the space, and there have been a few exciting new funding rounds over the last 3 months, our own included. So. There's investment in the space, there's appetite for the innovation. The customers, the banks and things like that are showing up as well, which is great. So
yeah. Sure. Great. Finally, obviously we touched on this before, you're heading over the pond to come and check out what's going on here in the UK and in Ireland. How does that obviously there'll be product managers hopefully from big banks, from tech companies here in the UK watching this, and if they're looking to leverage the services of someone like Hummingbird, how would you like to be approached by those companies? Is there anything that you'd want them to know about working with you guys? Is there anything that that you'd want to know about them? How does that kind of how would that work?
Absolutely. We're excited to work with companies from your part of the world, and they can just come to our website, hummingbird.co, and request a demo or get in touch with us. But we are working on the STR filing integrations for the UK authority for a few different Ireland, as I mentioned, a few different countries actually. And we're a great solution for any neobank, any payments company, any cryptocurrency company. We work with a lot of folks. We work with a few international customers who are actually going into the Ireland market with some of our US customers that are multinational payments companies. So excited about that.
Yeah, I'm sure it'd be great to see what happens when you guys come over here. Thank you very much for taking the time to chat, Joe. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. This was fun.